comprehensive planning process in the amount of $12,500.
Thank you very much. There's been a motion to approve the modified consent agenda in a second. Consent agenda has been read. No further discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving ahead to item number 5, now I'd like to recognize any resident that would like to come forward and speak on an item not on the agenda. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record, and welcome. An item not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will move forward to item number 6, which is business removed from consent agenda. And we'll start with 4B2, which was removed at the request of staff. Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council is aware, we've received some complaints in regards to both this particular request to extend construction hours as well as another. One of the actual parts of this was that if we receive complaints, the city engineer could go back to the original hours. As we discussed at a staff level, when we have these particular requests that come in, we either need to have the ordinance or we need not to have the ordinance. And especially when both of these, unlike the Windmere project where there's nothing out there, it's all open land, both of these projects are in the middle of housing areas. And so it's staff position that both of these particular requests to extend work hours should not, based upon the feedback we received from citizens, should not be approved.
Thank you. Questions of staff? Councilor Whiting?
Just a comment. You know, I think there are incidences, and I think you meant D.R. Horton, some of those areas that are...
Yeah, the Windermere project, yes, sir.
Windermere, okay, that's right, D.R. There are opportunities to extend hours, but I typically vote against them if it's in a residential area where it affects people. So I think we need to stick by our ordinance as we have them and really carefully look at these modified suspension of the ordinances for noise eliminations when they come up.
Councilor Lewis?
My experience since the Amazon project, I have some friends that live across the road out there, and they said that it was constant that Amazon's construction company was breaking the rules. They would call the police would come down, make a report, and that's where it stopped. It never got to the city engineer where it needs to go. So there was a trip up in the progression of where it's supposed to be. If we ever do this again, I think we need to make something hard and fast so that, you know, this gets telegraphed to the right place, and when they do violate it, they do lose it.
Councilor Lyman?
I just wanted to point out that apparently they're asking for 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., which is currently allowed 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. So that is actually, they're asking to restrict themselves further during the weekdays for more latitude on the weekends. And if I'm reading this right, the weekends are 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and they want 1 hour earlier, but to restrict themselves 4 hours from 9. So they're actually making it shorter on the weekends, just starting 1 hour earlier. Am I reading that right?
Mr. Reynolds?
Traditionally, the construction trades, especially during the summer months, want to start early in the mornings and then knock off later, earlier in the afternoon.
But by sticking with the policy, they'll be able to work 7 to 10, 7 a.m. 10 p.m. Monday through Friday, 9 to 9 on the weekends.
That's correct, sir.
Councilor Lewis?
I think you're missing the fact of overtime. They don't want to pay the overtime.
Well, I'm not really worried about them paying their overtime. I'm worried
I'm sure
about.
that's where they're going.
I'm worried about how it affects the surrounding properties.
All right. I guess one thing, and I apologize there, what I did receive a email too in regard to this, and I thought all of us received it from another resident talking about this encouraging decline. You know, when it's tightly in a residential, already established residential, I think builders, contractors all need to be considerate of the surrounding community. And I saw both of these, and obviously up later is the school district, and we've We've seen plenty of that as well. So, other comment? Councilor Whiting?
I'll just, if you want a motion to deny this request, I think that would be appropriate, and
Okay.
I will make that.
Is that a, Councilor Mokel?
Yes, I will second that then.
Okay, that is a motion for denial, and I have a second. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next up, 4C1, more donations for the Fun for All Playground. Counselor Luce.
Yeah, I'd just like to take a moment to thank Joe Tice for his kind donation. I believe it's a great way to honor his grandparents and his uncle. And another bench wouldn't hurt a thing up there, which sounds like we're gonna get. I would like to put in a request that a couple more picnic tables be set up there. A couple between the sidewalk and the play area look like they could be used. When the playground is heavily used, the people like to sit there and have lunch or whatever, so if staff could do that, it'd be great. And I'm just curious on whether or not the shelter rental up at Lyons has increased, or we're the same, or where we're at. If staff could get us that sometime down the road.
I think our fee schedule has been set in that regard and probably hasn't.
No, I'm just curious on if it's
The
been
usage.
being rented
Oh,
more
being
often
rented.
because of the playground.
Okay. Ms. Polly, do you have a quick comment on that? Insight?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councilor Lewis, members of council. I can pull the exact numbers, but Lions Park Shelter 1 and 2 typically are rented every weekend all summer long, and that is still the case this year. So I wouldn't say that we can see a definite increase or a decline because of the playground. It's still our most popular park.
Okay, thank you.
Great. You wanna make a
Jay
motion?
likes to make them.
Hmm?
Jay likes to make the
I'll-
motions, go
I'll-
ahead.
Counselor
I'll
Whiting?
offer Resolution 7910, a resolution of the City of Shakopee, Minnesota, accepting a donation of $1,000 and a bench for the Shakopee Fun for All Playground.
I have a motion and a
Second.
second by Counselor Luce. Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving ahead then, 7A1, park dedication fees. Ms. Polly will present. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tonight in your packet, you have a couple of updates to an ordinance or two ordinance revisions, actually, pertaining to our park dedication fees. This is an item that I've worked with Mr. Kursky on as development is increasing within the city, so I'll be presenting part of it, and then I'll let Mr. Kursky come up and say a few words about possible impacts on community development as well. So as you can see, we haven't revised our park dedication fee since 2005. It had been brought forward to council a few times in my 10 years here based on different developments that have come through based on the economy, and we have chosen at that time to keep them fairly consistent. So we have looked at the fees again. We have a lot of development coming in that has requested some looks at our fees based on our policies. So we've done some analysis on that. As we look at our park dedication fees, we look at how they're calculated as well as their impact. Our park dedication fees are used to construct new parks within the community as we get new growth within our community. We want to encourage development and not hinder it, but we also want to be able to provide those amenities for our residents that they expect as they move and work into this community. So we did a comparison every year. I participate in multiple studies on park dedication fees with metro cities. We also have our 10 comparable cities that the city does a lot of comparing with when it comes to fees, and we ran those numbers as well. As we saw within those, and it's been the case over the past number of years, we are on the higher side for single-family housing. We were on the low side for commercial industrial. We're on the higher side also for multifamily units. So looking at our calculations, we are still recommending to keep our single family the same and not change that. When we looked at our multifamily, we're looking at keeping townhouses and market rate apartments the same. Those still fall within our calculations. Both of those fall within our calculations of how we estimate park dedication. We are looking at a different number for those units, though, based on the market that are smaller one-bedroom studio apartments. When we look at park dedication calculations, we typically look at the number of people residing in those dwellings. The amount of land we take is a certain amount per 1 acre for every 75 people. So we continue to use those formulas. And then we also look at the formulas for commercial industrial and doing the formulas of current land sales divided by the number of pricing that we have. We use a multiplier of 2.5. This is in our comprehensive plan that we have. We came up with that we are more in line to be charging $11,000 per acre versus the $69.30 that we currently charge. You can see in your packet we included some of those calculations of how those came about. We included the list of comparable cities as well, so you can see where we are at amongst those. And I do have further studies. If you care to see those, I can send those out to you. So that's the first item that we want to discuss tonight. And I can let Mr. Kursky speak to the the multifamily developments that we have coming in and how this may affect those developments.
Questions for Jamie? If not, Michael?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As most of you know, the park dedication fee is actually based on a nexus, so people generated on a per unit basis. So we have found that we're seeing a lot more projects. In fact, the Sand Company project, the first phase is 63% one bedrooms and studios. So we're seeing smaller units, so therefore you have less people. The formula was previously based on a similar to a single family home number of people in an apartment. So what we're recommending tonight is that number really reflect the actual financial impact which we're supposed to be using for that nexus, and that's how we came up with that formula. We've also looked, the commercial land values have increased substantially. I actually found the original ordinance, and I think it was $700 or $800 an acre way back when. But as Ms. Polly mentioned, this has not been adjusted in quite a long time, and so if you look at some of our comparable cities, I would say the single-family homes have been sort of subsidizing the commercial land, and what we're trying to do is even that out now so that they're paying their fair market share.
Okay. I want to ask about what we really think impact is. So if I have a one bedroom versus a couple bedroom or a single family home, we're saying that unit holder wouldn't impact parks as much, or is that the theory of that behind that?
Mayor and Council, so it's based on a per person calculation per acre. So in a single family home, I think we use 2.5 or 3 people per house. We all know that's probably higher. On apartments, particularly for one bedrooms, typically you'll get 1 or 1.5 persons. So that's how come the numbers are less, because it's actually supposed to reflect the impact those people have financially on the system.
Other questions, Councilor Mokel?
I understand, part of why we're doing this, and it makes sense when we talk about our multifamily housing. I'm a little concerned on the commercial industrial that we went so high so quickly. Do you have any concerns about that?
Mayor and Council, I'm sure some of the commercial people will think it's a big jump, but if you look back, as Ms. Polly said, we haven't updated this in probably 10 years. We've basically been way under market for 10 years. So if you look at TriStar is a good example. That land sold for $175,000 an acre. Our fee was used a much lower number, so we picked that as kind of the high point. But Hy-Vee sold at $100,000 an acre unimproved. I mean, I think that we are well within the market. If you look at the table, a lot of other communities charge more. I think Plymouth is at $17,000 plus an acre. So again, it's supposed to really reflect the impact, so what we're trying to do is get these fees in line with what the real financial impact is.
I have a question. Michael, we're using the 11,000 versus some sort of percentage of fair market value? Some cities have that.
Mayor and Council, we could go to that process. I mean, Hopkins uses, I believe it's 4% of the fair market value of the land at sale. Other cities have different totals you can see in your package. it's really up to you. We're trying to just make this more reflective of what the real market values are. I think park dedication for a while, particularly on the single-family home side, has been when we were booming, was sort of the cash cow. We're trying to make it into something that there's a rational legal nexus to, and setting the fees that reflect that.
Counselor Lehman?
I kind of have a differing perspective. First, I think the commercial industrial is substantially increased, and I think it's on top of the energy tax. I think it's going to really make hurdles for commercial industrial development, which has been very nice for us to have that base in Shakopee. Second, my perspective on residential, single-family residential, is that a lot of these properties have amenities on their green spaces, sandboxes, jungle gyms, pools, these types of amenities where they have the ability to have recreation at home on the property, where you don't have that opportunity in the extreme density where really all there is a building and a parking lot and some drainage way. So, you know, when you make the argument of who's actually going to use recreational resources, I guess I disagree with that philosophy from that perspective, based on what I just mentioned. This would appear that the extreme density housing is getting a financial incentive to go that route in a development community, and I don't think our job is to put that out there, if you will, because I don't buy the argument of use. I see it the opposite.
Other questions of staff? Questions of staff? If not,
Mr. Mayor, I do have one thing I want to add just to, as I mentioned previously, in the past 10 years, we've brought the park dedication fees forward a few times. I do have my memo that we brought forward on January 8th of 2013, where we looked at this again, and it was when our commercial industrial lands were starting to move again. Knowing that we were under many of our communities then, we looked at the land sales at that time, and I had proposed an increase from 69.30 to 74.70. Not a huge increase, but I had proposed an increase so that we could incrementally increase that commercial industrial as those land values raised, as our comprehensive plan states. That was denied at that time, and we didn't raise our fees then. So now we're looking, you know, that was 4 years ago, and now we're looking at that bigger jump for that commercial industrial because land sales have been increased further since 2013. So that's one item I just wanted to bring forward where we had looked at this back then.
other questions of staff? Or Counselor Whiting?
Just a comment. I like the idea that we're trying to make this nexus fair for all users and put a formula out there that we can look to as a little more legally, if we're ever challenged on it anyway, that we have a formula that'll work for us. I do have an issue with the higher fees for commercial and industrial. I'd like to see us keeping that formula so it's fair and legal, but working it down a little bit so that we can be competitive, I guess.
Counselor Lehman?
Or even if you went with a percentage based and the percentage is much higher, that you try to phase it in over a period of time, like we're doing with the sewer fund, to where it's not such a big hit all at once. That's kind of what I was thinking.
No, I was trying to figure out we come up with 11 versus other communities with, not to compare, but, their impact, some of those communities have great park systems, we have great park systems. Just that number of 11 jumped out at me, and either a step or, should it be a percentage of the fair market value? I always know that that's a tough thing to define, but.
Fair.
Well, I think we need to work on this. I think we need to bring it back again. I like the idea of having it fair, and I would vote for it because it's more fair now across the board. But I think we need to take a look at and try and lower that somehow. But I do like the idea of having it changed so at least it's workable and fair across the board.
Counselor Lehman?
One of the points that was made was about the actual uses, and when you look at commercial and industrial, I mean, how do you gauge a commercial or industrial use using these when maybe they live out of town? You don't know these things, so it's really hard to gauge. When you go to a percentage base, it takes the issue of use out of the equation. Whether you are a single family and have all kinds of amenities in your backyard, or you're a single family that uses a lot of city amenities, it doesn't matter. It's a set percentage across the board for all types of uses, and it kind of removes who's using it, who isn't it.
Industrial or all of it?
All of it.
Counselor Lewis?
Well, I think we should leave the 11,000 per acre for commercial industrial as a deterrent. We're overbuilt. We don't have enough people to fill these jobs, and if they want to come here, then they're going to have to pay. You know, we've got a housing problem right now. Any more come here, we're just going to increase that housing problem. You know, and the more businesses that come, the more fiscal disparities we have to pay. So it doesn't make any sense to, keep giving it away.
Right. Well, I mean, this is I think commercial industrial, is the backbone of any community. And if you have a job there, you do want to live there. Yes, we are working on our housing here, but to keep it that high and make it restrictive, I guess I wouldn't use park dedication fees as a restrictive tool for a business that want to come here and be here. Mr. Reynolds?
Mr. Mayor, in listening to discussion, it seems that you might want to have us take a closer look at the percentage-based, or I guess, what is the direction that you're looking for staff to bring forward?
Okay. I think Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, maybe I can help. It is true that you can base park dedication fees on a percentage basis, but it's supposed to be on the average fair market value of, if you're talking commercial industrial, of unplatted commercial industrial that has sanitary sewer and water available, and what's the average fair market value of that land as of the date of the final plat. That can be difficult to determine. Maybe unless staff has unless there's some annual report you get that has that information, it can be difficult to determine. So oftentimes, I think it's easier for staff to have a fixed number that is tied to that land value, but it's a fixed number so they can work with it administratively easier. Now, but if the council's sense is to go with the average, some sort of percentage, we can do that. But it's not, in other words, it's not as simple as asking the developer what they paid for that piece of property and using that number. That's not the statute. It says you need the average fair market value, not the fair market value of that particular piece of property. So it can get a little cumbersome.
Councilor Lewis?
I think if we go fair market value, we're going to be using Mr. Thompson's services more often than not.
I do too.
Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Pauley?
If I could suggest too, so in your packet, we just included those comparable cities, because that's what we've been basing a lot of our items on, and you'll see that 11,000 is rather on the high end, based, because a lot of them are percentages within those cities. I do have, and I can pass this out, it's got some chicken scratches on, but this is a larger survey that I participate in every year that the City of Roseville does. And just for instance, when you look at this in our neighboring communities that aren't considered our comparable communities, and I know we don't compare ourselves to other communities as far as what these fees go, and we have a formula to do that. But just looking at it, if you go to Chanhassen, commercial industrial is $12,500 per acre. If you go to Eden Prairie, it is $11,500 per acre. So I can pass this around up there if you'd like to look at it. Those are two neighboring communities. They're not part of our comparables. They are, adjacent to us though. However, they, I believe, set those also based on their land values, similar formulas to what we have come up with. So it's something else to consider.
Thank you. Councilor Lehman?
Jamie, if I look at the back of what was in our packet of the surrounding cities, sorry. Didn't see she was coming up here.
Well, that's a city thing. This is a
Yep.
good chart
I'm
here.
just gonna go off this one here for a
I
moment.
think,
Anyway, if I'm going off the last page of the memo.
Yep.
And it shows Shakopee's single family as the highest on the list.
Correct.
Its townhouses as the highest on the list. Its apartments, the highest on the list. And it shows commercial and industrial, 9% of fair market value, 6,900. About in the middle, looking at the list. So by looking at that, it almost looks like our single family and apartments are higher than most.
Correct. Yep. And if you look at that big chart, you'll see similar
But
to
we're doing
that we
nothing
are.
to our single family in the proposal.
Correct.
did you have a question? I'm hearing the most that we're discussing about the industrial, but you, Counselor Lehman, you have some issues with all of it then, right?
Well,
I'm hearing most of the discussion on the industrial.
I am. If we, the memo that you spoke about earlier that we don't have would be nice to see, and a copy of this would be nice to see ahead of time, and so we could actually study it instead of doing it right here on the fly. There you go. It just seems to me like see, Savage, they made it easy. They made it same across the board. You know, maybe we'll look at something like that, you know. Pretty easy to administer. Find a happy, lucky number in the middle and
Right.
go with it.
Counselor Whiting?
You know, I think Mr. Luce brought up a good point about, right now, we don't have a lot of industrial commercial land that, we're dealing with right now. I mean, we have potential with some annexation and things, but right now, what our goal is some of these apartments and housing. So this does help that in fact, create some of those smaller, apartments that are needed right now. To me, I would move forward with what's proposed and bring it back for discussion at the, planning commission and park board and things like that, and then bring us back something that's maybe been revised. But I think we need to move on this new fee schedule now.
On all of it, or the housing, or the
I would do it all.
industrial?
I would move it all and then bring it back at a later date to look at it. I think we need to get it in line and fair.
Counselor Lehman?
But by this chart, it's not fair. You got single family is the highest in the area. And you've got,
Well, it's used at least on a percentage. It has a multiplier that goes across the board to get a per acre price.
no, it's, the back page is where the highest.
I know what you're saying,
The
but
highest out of all of them.
there's a formula
One-
involved.
Right,
And,
no,
and if you take, the amount of land, let's, an example. Let's use what's proposed at Canterbury, 900 and some units on a small piece of land. The equivalent of that is the density of all of Old Shakopee. Because on an average block, you've got 10 houses with space for amenities. Who's gonna use the most city amenities? I mean, 900 people, 2 per unit, 800 people or 1,800 people, 2,000? You're gonna have some usage out of 2,000 people in one development. And they're paying less than half of what a single family house would.
Counselor Luce, did you want to comment?
No, I'm good.
Counselor Mokel?
No, my concern is going so steep with the commercial industrial up front, but I agree. I think we need to move on the market rate pieces because we do need that housing for the employees that we need to bring here.
I am good on the residential. I would like to see more information on the industrial piece to make sure either we're at where we should be or do a step program, or look at that. It looks like, I don't know, I'm not gonna say that we're low. Now, we'd be up at the top on that, but 11's too rich if they're paying 7 now, from that. So, you'll break it apart and do some, and then come back and get more direction or more information from staff on the industrial. Counselor Luce?
How much commercial industrial land do we have right now? Does anybody know?
No, not very much,
There's,
but
n-
we
there's
may
not
in
a
the
lot.
future.
There may be some in the future, depending on how other things go tonight, but
I would think this is something we could look at in the future when we have commercial development. Right now, we don't, we're out of land stock for commercial
Well,
development.
we're just,
You have to have it in place prior to that development.
yeah.
so, Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Mayor, hearing the discussion here, if the sense of the council is to go forward with the residential, you can move the ordinance that's before you, ordinance number 962, but leaving commercial industrial at 6,930 per acre with no change, and then study it later. So you can still adopt the ordinance to implement the residential, but without the commercial industrial.
Okay, Counselor Whiting?
I'll make the motion to approve revisions to the park dedication fees required for single-family, multifamily developments as recommended by the park boards, and adopt ordinance number 962, amending the city's adopted 2017 fee schedule, and bring back commercial industrial for further discussion at a later date.
Counselor Mokel?
I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion to approve the residential and leave the industrial per more information.
I think we need to put a date on it, maybe 2 months or
Actually, we can move that relatively quickly, and we'll include some of the information that Ms. Polly has in her particular, the other surveys that are out there as well.
Is that clear enough direction?
As well as,
Yep.
can we also add as well as how much commercial industrial we have?
Yeah, we can do that as well, yep.
Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. The motion to leave the industrial out until, or at the same rate until we get more information. Counselor Whiting?
I'll move ordinance number 963, amending Shakopee City Code Section 150.65 regarding parks and dedication fees, with the same clarification that commercial and industrial will be brought back at a later date.
Okay. Counselor Mokel?
I'll second.
Mr. Thompson,
Okay.
you want to weigh in on that?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council, 963 is what you moved, correct?
Right.
I'm not sure that really has any, Amy, you might want to just summarize that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this has nothing to do with the fees. It actually has the process of how we calculate the park dedicate. So it does have to do with the fees, but not the amount of the fees. There's just a few changes within the park and dedication city code that we are bringing forward tonight. We'll be looking at this more in depth as we look to our comprehensive plan and if there's any other major changes. But the changes we're bringing forward tonight are, one is adding the requirement in the ordinance that public trails are completed by the developer at the time of the development. It's a practice that we've been working with the developers over the past number of years to put in any trails that are necessary. We do have the requirement or the ability in our park dedication ordinance to allow for a trail fund if we have one set up, or in lieu of that, we've had the developers construct the trail. Now we're just adding that in writing to the ordinance. The other part of the ordinance that we are updating is when we calculate park dedication fees for commercial industrial, basically when we're looking at land. We have in the past, wetland and ponding has always been something that's not included as park dedication. It's not considered buildable land, so that's been taken out. The other items, though, are drainage ways and utility easements is something that we've deducted from the overall gross acreage as well. And in many cases, we're finding that in some of these areas, even with the parkland that we just accepted for a recent residential development, is there's a drainage and utility easement going right through the parkland that we adopted. So there are times when that is buildable land, even if it has an easement on it, it's still buildable land. So we are recommending that we don't deduct drainage ways and utility easements from the gross acreage, that we just keep the ponding and the wetlands as part of that deduction. It makes it cleaner. When we look at a plat, there's sometimes multiple easements in multiple directions. If those easements can still have something built on top of it, they are considered buildable and would be consistent with the ordinance.
So I want to ask you a couple questions on that. So I've seen over in our community, over the years, we've gotten some land in lieu of cash that turns out to be, at times appear or act undesirable. And then we take cash, and then we don't have the land. But actually now we're in a situation where over the last 15 years, we had a piece of property that identified some land for park dedication for land that was at that time deemed not suitable for park. But that definition of how we use parks and that has changed a little bit, and now that piece actually is deemed an amenity, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And then on that same parcel, we were, needed a missing link on the trail concept. And we want to make that more of a requirement separate than the park dedication fee, right?
Correct.
If it's a missing link, right? They don't get, well, I'm going to build this trail that's a missing link, so I should get credit for that. No, the trail should be a standard connection piece.
Correct, and that's been our practice
Right.
over the years.
Okay,
as
I just
well.
want to clarify those two actions.
And Mayor and Council, that actually came from some of the development communities, so it's been a practice, we've been asking them to build those trails. They would like it a requirement, because when they're negotiating for the land from the seller, they want to make sure they calculate that as a deduct out, because they're gonna have to build that trail.
And then I have a question, additional follow-up question on ordinance the 963 on what is now new, item number 16, that was 15. Guess I don't have a page number, but park and trail cash contributions are to be calculated based off the fees in place at the time of final plat. And I get that, you plat it and you calculate the fees. But I'd like to pay them when I pull a building permit, because there's gonna be no impact until a permit gets pulled. And I was looking for language in that.
Mayor and Council, I'll defer to the city attorney. We've had it both ways, back and forth through the years. The state law has changed and it's back and forth, so I will leave it to Mr. Thompson to tell us
Mr.
what the
Thompson,
preferred
we
way.
have had it back and forth in our community, and
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, for a long time, right, when I became city attorney, I know it was discretionary. The builder, developer could choose to pay it either at park dedication, at final plat or at building permit. There were some issues with that, primarily from the cash flow perspective, and it is true, I guess, that the building permit is when somebody will then sooner occupy the house, but the recording of the plat is actually when the lots are created. So those are, the creation of the lots is really what triggers the park dedication fees. Having said that, the state law is a little confusing. The state law says that for purposes of calculating the amount of your park dedication fees, you have to use the average fair market value of land as of the date of the final plat. So that's the date that you need to determine whether your fee is reasonable. But state law is silent as to when you have to pay those fees. So state law puts a little restriction on you, but the council does have the discretion to put in its code that they can be paid either at final plat or building permit. The council did consider that, I don't know how long this ordinance been in place, but it's been quite a while, and switched it and said you have to pay them at the time of final plat. So,
And Mayor and Council, in single-family homes, it's typically done at plat, because that would require us to collect from different builders or whatever at their building permit. So that's why you've been seeing most of the new subdivisions are coming in pieces, because they're actually platting what they think they can sell and build within a certain period of time, and they pay that fee up front. I think there would be some opportunity for the council to discuss on commercial permits, since there are outlots typically, or platted larger lots, whether it could be collected at building permit, because then you're only dealing with typically one property owner, versus in a single-family subdivision, there could be 100 property owners.
Councilor Lehman?
Yeah, one of the problems that you run into with the, at time of pulling a permit is, as we all know, there's multiple properties that were platted, and at the time, the code was at the time of permit, and we find out 20 years later, they never paid their park dedication fees. So,
We've seen it all both ways.
right, so the problem with going back and forth is that you create a situation to where now you might have a, 100-unit development, they build 25 houses out of 100, they wait for 5 years to do the next piece, and it kind of gets moved aside, and there's so many pieces that keep tracking from an administrative side that it's just easier just to do it at the final plat. Be done with it.
Good. I thought I would bring it up and ask, because I know our community has been back and forth. All right, so
My motion stands, yeah.
motion stands. Can I have a second?
No, I have a question on the motion. So, we're gonna tell a developer to build a community-wide amenity, recreational amenity, but we're not gonna give them credit in their, park and rec, in their park fee.
Correct.
Say that again?
Well, if a property is required to pay X amount of dollars or give up X amount of land, they do that, but then they're expected to do more.
The trail connections have been something along county roads with along city collector streets, if there's a trail requirement, have always been required of the developer to put in it as that connection, similar to a street connection. Those trail connections have been required in the past, have been completed, and have not gone towards park dedication fee or credited towards park dedication fee. We do have in the city the ability to charge a trail fee in lieu of them building the trail if we would like to set that fee. We have not set that fee at this time and have worked with the developer to do that with their development in,
I think there's a difference between a sidewalk on one side and a trail on the other side of a collector street, which is a city policy, or a county road, which is a county policy, than there is to say we'd like a gerrymandering trail going over here that.
no, typically the trails that we're requiring that are public trails are the ones that are connecting major trail systems
Is it
or a major trail
Connecting,
area
right.
or roadway.
That's- We're trying to, I think we've seen this over the time. Well, I'm putting that trail in that connects, and then, well, I should get some credit for that. That's for the greater good of the whole system. Park dedication fees for the impact of the area, in that realm of it. But I think we've seen, and we still have some missing links where we have a trail and then nothing in between, and then the developer comes in and says, well, I'll put in this nice trail for you, you'll have a nice connection. Well, no, that's the expected requirement, because this is gonna connect, it's more of so I can walk all the way around.
So now we need a master trail plan that is public, that everybody can see, so they know what the expectations are.
Correct, and we currently do have a map with our gaps in trail systems that we use when we're looking at the development reviews of all developments, and we comment on those.
Okay.
Counselor Whiting?
No, some of those trails too, after it's been developed and you try to come in later, all of a sudden it's, not in my backyard. And, even though you plan that trail, you get pushback from the residents. So I'd like to see that, done during development phases so we don't have that, and the trail's there when you bought the house. Make more
And
sense to me.
we've had spots in our communities, whether it's on the west end or here, or fill in the gap, or even in Southbridge, where there was, years ago, there was no trail through Southbridge. And then to get through there, it was, just like you say, a little struggle, so. All right, enough? More discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving ahead to the highlight, 7B1, the annual financial report by Bergen KDV, and their representative will come forward and present. Thanks, welcome, glad you're here.
We should have theme music for you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council members. Steve Wishman from Bergen KDV will be presenting tonight, so I'll let him go from here.
Screens tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council and city management. Pleasure to be here tonight to walk you through the audit results for 2016. My name is Steve Wishman. I'm a partner with the firm Bergen KDV, and welcome any questions or comments you have as we go along. So Part of the audit process, or I should say, the final products in the audit process, which you have electronically, are 3 documents: the comprehensive annual financial report, the communication letter, and then there's a reporting item in accordance with government auditing standards. So those are the deliverables in the audit process, similar to prior years. Just a little history on the actual process itself. It does start out in the fall of the year with the planning with the city finance team, going through major developments, transactions, et cetera. For instance, this year, your community center, ice arena, bond, et cetera. We then plan the field work. We're usually out twice, right shortly after year end, and then usually about April we're here for about a week to go through all the audit test work. That includes confirmation of balances from the county, from the local banks, from your investment advisors, obviously testing of transactions, testing of the payroll cycle, and making sure they're all recorded properly for the right amount in the right funds and those types of things. So we do a lot of substantive type work. We also do look at the internal control structure of the city, and I have an update on that for you here in just a slide or two, talking about your internal controls. At the conclusion of the field work itself, a draft of that comprehensive annual financial report is prepared by the city staff, finance team, and then it's reviewed by us, and then our opinion obviously is in the front end of that. The final reports are then bound and finalized after we meet. About a month ago or so we met to kind of go over the draft of all those reports, and then we're here tonight with the council presentation for a very high level look at the 2016 results. So it does take about a 6-month period from start to finish, and again, so ultimately what we're as auditors are doing is providing an opinion on your financial statements in the comprehensive annual financial report. Pages 11, 12, and 13 are is the actual audit opinion, and it does take about 3 pages to go through a variety of things. And very, very briefly, from a high-level standpoint, it does talk about on the first page what management's responsibility is. Management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the comprehensive report. So that's the day-to-day, the week-to-week, month-to-month recording of the transactions, putting them in the right fund and the right accounts, capturing those in your accounting system. Our job then as auditors is to take that financial information for the year ended 2016 and make sure it is accurate, number one, and then follows the government accounting standards for the presentation in both the financial statements and the footnote disclosures. So again, we're issuing an unqualified or unmodified or clean opinion on the basic financial statements. That is the highest level we issue, the best you can receive, and that is a similar level of assurance that you've received in the past. But again, congratulations for receiving that highest level. The comprehensive report will also be submitted to the Government Finance Officers Association for their Certificate of Excellence, and you've received that for a number of years. And we believe it complies again with their standards, and that there is some additional statistical information in the back, as well as some additional budgetary information that's in there as well. And that's the main difference between the government finance officers kind of reporting level and our government auditing standards. Just wanted to talk real quickly about one thing in the audited financial statements as well, the pension standards, GASB 68 and 71. Essentially, it's the PERA plan that is in year 2, basically, of the reporting. So what happens is the PERA plan, both the general plan and the police and fire plan, are audited and actuarially calculated what the unfunded liability is. Your percentage is allocated to you based on your contribution and in relation to all the contributions of all the participating entities. There's about a $26 million long-term liability on your statement of net position that's recorded for 2016, and that did increase fairly significantly from last year. Of that $26 million, about $18 million is to the police and fire plan, and the other $5 million or so is in the general plan. So about 18 and 5 or 7. In addition to the actual long-term liability, there are some deferral items that are on the statement of net position as well, and so that does offset that net impact, if you want to say. Yes.
Counselor Lewis?
You said there was a significant increase. What was cause of the increase?
Yeah, the major increase was on the police and fire plan, and it was relating to their assumption on the investment rate of return. That dropped over 2 percentage points as to what they were, they lowered their expectation on the investment pool in the fund, and as a result of that, that liability actually about tripled for most of our local government clients. You didn't have to recognize that whole gap in 1 year. That gets amortized over a 4 or 5 year period, so there are some deferral items in there as well. But to say overall, the liability that impacted your bottom line, if you want to say in your statement of net position, did increase a couple $1 million this year. Probably the most important thing, though, is the last part, is talking about the statutory contribution. You are required to make an employer match for your employees. You fully met that obligation for 2016. So you do not need to write a check per se to PARA for that unfunded, your share of that unfunded liability. It's a long-term actuarially determined number that obviously the legislature will continue to look at as far as funding levels. They may and likely will increase those employer match rates, if you want to say. And that would be your budget impact for the city to say, you know, we went up a 0.5%, et cetera.
Sir, if I remember, for the last 10 years, we've had this same conversation where the state, for whatever reason, isn't very good at managing its pension, and they're basically putting it out to everybody else to help them shore it up.
Yeah, part of the government accounting.
Does that sum it up pretty well?
Yes and no. You know, the actuarially funded pension plans, you know, there is a team and a board that does manage those resources. The actual Government Accounting Standards Board made the change to require this amount be included in your financial statements. So it is not directly a legislative requirement, if you want to say, from the state's perspective. It is more of a national requirement from the Government Accounting Standards Board that pushes this unfunded liability onto all the statements of net position or balance sheets.
Over the long term, they try to make entities, mainly public entities, actually shore up their long-term unfunded liability.
That's what I said. I just was really
This is
simple
all.
about it.
This is our part. It does not have anything to do with the state, but one would say that if the state is short, they solve it a different way, and it may be spread over the entire state. But trying to shore up what our responsibility is here in our community.
And again, your responsibility is that statutory contribution, and that was fully met for 2016. Your employer match for all your employees. But it is a significant calculation and an amount that goes in the financial statements as well as the note disclosures. And there are actually some supplemental schedules as well that kind of track and will track over a 10-year period, kind of that plan funding percentage. And obviously we're only in year 2 at this point, but you know, we're kind of seeing that 70 to 80% range in the general plan, 80 down to in the mid-60s now for the police and fire because of that change. And we have, you know, so again, if you look at that and compare that to a national perspective as to how well the plan is doing, you know, the 80% is actually a fairly good number. The police and fire plan did get obviously readjusted for that assumption on the investment rate of return. But again, you know, certainly well within the range, I'd say, from a national perspective on those funding percentages. Legal compliance is another part of the audit process that we are required to test. There are 7 areas that are listed here. So again, it's about 100 pages of checklists that we have to go through that the Office of State Auditor provides to us local accounting firms. So making sure you're fully adequately collateralized in your deposits, that your debt that you issue is done properly in accordance with statute. Contracts and bids, you have the proper documentation. No current year of compliance findings on the Office of the Legal Compliance. So did a great job with all those requirements. And you know, most of them have at least 1 or 2 items that we report on. A lot of it's in the contracting and bidding. So I just want to say the fact that you had nothing is excellent, and to congratulate your whole team for making sure that that again you maintain the compliance with that. Probably the biggest change for 2016 is just our government auditing standards report. And I'm pleased to report that there were no material weaknesses and no significant deficiencies reported. That is fairly rare. Probably less than 10% of our audits receive a clean internal control report, if you want to say, with no material weaknesses or no significant deficiencies. And if you recall, last year we did have that segregation of accounting duties where we had that in that middle level significant deficiency. Due to some of the tweaks and changes that you made internally and the cash receipting, in the payroll and some of the offsite operations, we were able to lower that to just that lowest level of other deficiency. So again, nothing in writing in the report. Always remain vigilant, obviously, that internal controls are not perfect, and they never will be perfect. So again, your team, your finance team, as well as the rest of the city employees, make sure that you can maintain those adequate segregation of duties.
Steve, is in this lower downgrade of this, is this a personnel thing or a technology thing?
This year was probably more a personnel thing. There were just some tweaks in the people that were looking at some of the processes. And I know Darren and I were just talking tonight that you have some technology implementation too, as well as some of the paperless things with the audit trail documentation that would even be more helpful in the future to continue to keep that at that lowest level. So most of it still is person related, if you want to say. But the technology, I think for 17 will be a factor in maintaining that.
Councilor Lehman?
It's not individual persons, it's the lack,
Personnel.
yeah, it's a lack of personnel. In the
Personnel.
past, it was that we weren't big enough to have the size of staff required to take care of the deficiency because they wanted it going through so many different hands to achieve that. And it just didn't make financial sense to do that.
Right.
So when we say personnel, it's not individual personnel, it's the hands passing and checks and balances per se.
Correct. Kind of the multiple touch of the important things, correct. So again, congratulations for that lowering of that internal control item so that there's nothing in the material weakness or significant deficiency. Quick reminder of the things that we normally see: segregation of duties, preparation of the financial statements. Your team, finance team, does that. And if there were any material audit adjustments, that is one that is common as well. As part of the audit process, we would find something that needs to be changed. Nothing there as well. So doing a great job on the finance team to be ready for us from audit time. So one emerging issue that we have is just relating to the other post-employment benefits, kind of the implicit rate subsidy for the healthcare plans, things of that nature. That is GASB Statement 75. That is going to mirror GASB Statement number 68 as far as how it is reported, like the PERA plan type thing. So there'll be a little bit of a change that's coming up in 2 years. Just kind of a quick note there that that's on the forefront, and there will need to be generally actuarial studies are prepared to calculate that gap, if you want to say, on the implicit rate for the healthcare costs that the city has relating to some of their current and former employees. So we'll be working with your team in the next year to get that implemented, to get a beginning balance for that. Shifting gears then, just a quick walk through the financial data. And this just recaps the general fund for 2016. Revenues were just shy of $26 million, $25,927,000. Expenditures that was up about $1.6 million from last year. Expenditures $21,916,000. That's up from $21,063,000 in 2015. Fund balance did increase a little over $900,000 from $9,840,000 up to $10,761,366. When I looked at this chart, obviously you've had significant growth on the revenue and the expenditure side in the general fund as your city continues to build out and grow. And as a result, the budget has increased over the last number of years. And the fund balance itself has been from a low of about $9 million and a high point this year of about $10.7 million. We'll look at that kind of a percentage and what some of the parameters are from the Office of State Auditor here in just a second. So surpluses in each of the 5 years as presented, so revenues did exceed the expenditures, and that contributes to the fund balance growth that you see. As a result of the revenues and the expenditures growing, as well as the capita numbers, you do see that for between 2015 and 16, just a pure calculation, $644 of revenue per capita, 544 of expenditures per capita, up a little bit from last year. It does give you just a little bit of a barometer where you were 5 years ago at 575 and 494 respectively for revenues and expenditures. Fairly stable in 13 and 14 at 6 to 608. Now you're growing a little bit more as the general fund revenues continue to increase for 2016 as you compare that to 2015. One of the big drivers in the success of the general fund and the fund balance is how well you budget and how accurate your actual results are. This slide just shows that your total revenues budget of $25,260,000 was about $667,000 higher than the actual, or excuse me, the actual was higher than the budget by $667,000. If you look at the categories there, you do see the license and permits, fairly conservative budget. You exceeded that by $295,000. Charges for services were about $382,000 over budget. That's the majority of that $666,000 variance. And that relates mostly to police contracts and some engineering contracts in the charges for service line. Expenditure-wise, you budgeted $21,712,000, came in at $21,916,000, so about $203,000 over budget. All of that in the public safety line relating to some compensated absences and some software that was purchased that exceeded
Mr. Lehman?
budget.
The fines and forfeits is substantially up. I know it's a small dollar amount, and I've asked this question before, and I can't remember what the answer was. It was
One-time
it was a
transfer, I believe.
It was a one. Yeah, it was a one-time.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lehman, fines and forfeitures, it's all dependent upon what activity is going on, and if we take in forfeitures for, I remember you asking this question too a couple months ago. It's all related to activity of when a forfeiture actually comes in. So it could have come in a couple years ago, and it takes a while for it to clear at the state level and come through and such like that. So it's really like you said, it's a small dollar amount, but it's a tough number to put a target on. So that's why we usually keep the budget relatively low, because we don't ever really know if
Right.
what's going to come in or what's not going to come in. So
I guess the important point of the comment and the question was that no, the police aren't out there just writing tickets to raise revenue.
When I look at this, I look at the level of taxation versus funds from users, or, and that to keep the taxation at a stable level rate, to see other funds do well, that if we're license and permits, those are activity that the user has to pay. Or the charges for services, those types of things. It diversifies our income base, actually, and it doesn't rely so much on taxation. I think that is good.
I would agree.
All been there.
Yep.
They've always been there.
Right.
So bottom line, after some of the transfers out to some of the other funds, you had budgeted a increase in your fund balance of $453,000. The actual was $921,256. So you did exceed that by about $467,000. So revenues higher than budget, expenditures slightly higher, but again, your transfers were right on budget, and as a result of the revenues being higher, you were able to add more to your fund balance at the end of the year for subsequent years' use. As far as the percentage of that fund balance, this is the unassigned fund balance as a percentage of your expenditures. For 2016, that was 49%. So really what that would mean is if you didn't receive any more funds in the general fund, you'd be able to cash flow for 6 months, or 49% of the year. That's up 2 percentage points from last year at 47% from 2015. But if you look at the 5-year, you're low of 46 and a high of 51, so you're right in the middle of that range. And the Office of State Auditor Generally has about a 50% fund balance level that they recommend, so you're right at that 49%. Your internal budgeted line item or budgeted expenditures between 40 and 45%, that would calculate out to within that range as well. So right where you want that to be, where your policy says, where the state auditor's office recommends that as well. So the 49% certainly a very good number, not excessive by any means, but again, very healthy fund balance for the general fund. Again, real quick, just looking back at the revenues for just a second here. This just shows the 5 years of kind of where the categories have gone, and so you can see of the total. The major changes this year, again, that charges for services, and you can kind of see how that's grown even for the last 5 years. That back in 2012, charges for services were just over 4 million. Now they're up to about 4.7 million. And then the license and permits really has had some significant growth. Back in 2012, $1,229,000. For 2016, now $2,564,000. So again, kind of those user charges for the services that are being provided. And then the very bottom one just shows the tax and assessment, the tax levy essentially, about $15 million in 2012, up to about $17 million in 2016. So again, just kind of gives you a barometer there of, from a revenue standpoint, which categories are driving that increase over the 5-year period that's presented here. Obviously, a key to the tax levy system is just the taxable tax capacity and what your certified levy is and the actual rate that's calculated. Very nice rebound in your taxable tax capacity from 2013 through 2016. You're now at the highest point at over 40 million, and then your tax certified levy, 17,372,000. That is up about 800,000 from 16,573,000 in 2015. And again, most of that collected and reported in the general fund. But again, very nice growth in your tax capacity to support the tax levy that's being allocated to the residents. Again, that rate is just that tax certified levy divided by the taxable tax capacity. The city rate is the bottom line, or the blue line. So very stable from 37.86 to 37.9. State average is up in the 46-47 range. That's the top line, and the Metro City average about 43. So again, lower than from a tax capacity or tax rate standpoint than both Metro averages and the statewide average there. So, and very, very consistent over that period as well. So you can see the lines are really following each other quite directly. Quick look at the expenditure side, 2016 versus 2015. So for every dollar that's expended in the general fund, what percentage goes to public safety, public works, parks and recreation, and general government? As you can see, they're all within about a percentage point. So again, not a lot of change there, but it does just show you that of every dollar, about 48 cents for public safety, about 19 cents for park and rec, 14 cents for public works, and then about 18 cents for general government. So just shows you how nice and consistent that is as you continue to build out your city and obviously provide the services that are needed. And these are all very consistent with the other city audits we do. Public safety is number one, just a kind of a costly necessity, if you want to say. General government in that 18-20% is very common. And then Parks and Rec, that does vary quite a bit from city to city. Some are in the lows in the 10 to 12. Some are, up around that 20% range. You're probably on the higher level there, as I would compare that to other cities. Want to shift gears then and just talk about your two enterprise funds, which those two funds that are self-supporting or designed to be self-supporting, the sewer fund and your storm drainage fund. So really, for 2016, you did see a revenue increase, about 250,000, up to 3,100,000 of operating revenues. The expenses, 3,938,000. That's up about $90,000 from last year. And then operating loss, 838,699. And your overall change in your net position, 979,595. Big driver there is a depreciation expense that's charged into that operating loss, and that's about $812,000. So that's essentially all of the operating loss that you see in the sewer fund. So cash position remains relatively unchanged as a result of that operating loss, because that's just a charge for the systemic use of your capital assets. So, but again, as you look at that, you do see, you know, fairly stable revenues for the last 4 years. Your expenses have actually come down from about 4.1 million down to 3.9, and your operating loss has actually is a little bit lower than it was, say, 4 years ago, and then the change in net position as well.
Councilmember Lehman?
Question.
Sure.
About the depreciation loss. You know, in a simple example is you put a pipe in the ground and and the pipe costs X amount of dollars to put it in the ground, and you give it a lifespan, and you depreciate it over that lifespan. But when you take the same pipe, put it in the ground and say it's gonna last 20 or 30 years, and then 20 years into its life, you do a new process to it of cured in place process that gives it another 30-year expected life. When we do something like that, should we be going back through our depreciation on these specific areas and expanding it since we've gave them new life?
Yeah, I think you'd want to evaluate that and determine you know, how significant that change is, and if that's something you want to capture, because depreciation lives can be changed. It's, you know, it's an estimate of the useful life. So if you thought it was 20 years and then all of a sudden it goes to 50 years as a result of something else, certainly that can be redone and recalculated and recalibrated in the statements. And I think that's something that routinely that you look at as to the significance of it, and then you know, any additional charge or reduction that might be necessary.
Darren?
Mr. Mayor, council members, I believe we did go back and, I don't remember, I don't know the exact year, but I know it was a few years ago, we did adjust some of our depreciation on some of that infrastructure items. We increased it, knowing that some of our infrastructure was lasting longer than we originally anticipated. I don't have the number of years offhand, if we went from 35 to 50 or if it was from 50 to 60 or something to that nature, but I know we did increase it at one point in time, so.
And there's other things that we really can't, because we're not really prolonging their life, maybe a lift station or a forest main or something.
Right, and the one thing to note too is that depreciation is based off of historical value, and so obviously when we put something in the ground now or 20 years ago, putting it in the ground or replacing that item 20 or 40 years from now is going to be exponentially more expensive, and so
Right.
depreciating an item faster is probably more conservative than depreciating it longer as well too, so you probably try to set yourself up in a little better financial position as well.
And a great point that those assets are carried at the historical cost. They don't get adjusted up and down for, you know, market value or things. It's what they cost when you put them, when you place them in service, so. One final slide on the enterprise funds on the storm drainage. So again, the charges for services, $1,202,000, up 100,000 from last year. Again, the highest level from a revenue standpoint in the 5 years presented. Operating expenses were a little bit higher this year, from $1,748,000 up to $1,888,000, so about 140,000. About a $686,000 operating loss, but again, there's about $800,000 of depreciation in that number as well. So, pretty consistent number that's being allocated to both sewer and storm drainage as far as depreciation. And the change in net position, negative $722,75. You kind of notice that the difference between the operating loss and the change in net position. Some years there's a big difference, some years there's not, and that's usually the capital contributions that are made from developers or other funds into the storm drainage or sewer fund. So that's why you sometimes see that the actual change in net position for those capital improvements that are donated, if you want to say, make those a little bit different. So I just wanted to explain that real quick as well.
These two funds, Steve, running at a loss, a concern?
No, you know, you generally, you look at it and say, what's our policy on funding the depreciation? Are we going to charge the current users and for the current use and the future use? And your policy has been, you know, just to kind of run that operating loss with the depreciation. So no, it's pretty consistent. We do see that quite often. That you know, kind of just current users pay the current charges and things. So it's kind of more of a policy decision. That.
Darren?
Mr. Mayor, and I think this goes along that depreciation is a tough animal to kind of grasp as well. And I think when we reviewed our enterprise funds earlier this year, looking at that cash balance.
Right.
Looking at our future capital outlay, understanding where our cash position is important in kind of determining our future rates and our financial
We had
position as well.
discussion, we adjusted a rate, and then, you know, I look at that, but then you do that every year, and I know we're trying to actually look out way longer to make sure that our funds are okay and make adjustments, and we are talking about technology advances where it may be actually cheaper to replace things later.
Sure.
From that aspect.
Yeah, and both sewer and storm drainage do have, you know, adequate cash reserves at the end of the year for operations and capital needs as well for short term. Couple final slides here. The bonded obligation debt, again, here you see a fairly significant change, and that's due to the $29,500,000 tax abatement bond that was issued for the community center and the ice arena. And so as a result of that, you see the total debt from $8.2 million up to about $36 million at the end of the year. The debt service fund balance remains consistent, up a little bit, about $700,000. So there, again, just kind of a new normal, if you want to say, for the large projects that were undertaken in 2016. Just a side note that there is a separate fund that was created for the capital construction of the facilities. And at the end of the year, there's about $6.5 million of fund balance left in that. I believe there's about $10 million of cash, but then there's like accounts and contracts payable of about $3 million. So again, about 3/4 of the way through, if you want to say, at the end of 16. Darren said, you know, now there's maybe $1 million left in that fund. So as you wrap that up, that capital type project will close itself out. But you do create, and we audit that separate fund, if you want to say, that captures the bond proceeds and the construction costs for that. So probably your next question is this, like, well, what's the debt service schedule? And obviously that changed this year as well. So this is principal and interest, so just under $3 million for 2017. The high point is 2018 at about $3.2 million. And then it goes back into that $2.5 million range. And then starting in 2026, it's about $2 million principal and interest for all the general obligation debt that's outstanding for the city. So just kind of shows you how far, you know, out you are before, you know, things level off, and just that's included in the footnotes to the financial statements as well, in a little bit more detail. So again, busy year for the city with obviously with the construction projects, but overall very excellent financial results. Very stable general fund. Enterprise funds are operating as, you know, very consistent with the prior years. And with that, I'll just say thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions. If there's anything I maybe didn't talk about that you'd like to know more about, be happy to answer it at this time.
Thank you, Steve. Questions of Steve? Councilor Lehman?
Well, I took the liberty to read all three of these books in their entirety. I thought they were pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
I thought it was really good. What did catch my attention was page 145, table 10 of the big book. Okay.
Started at the back.
Shows our ratio of general bonded outstanding debt, and it breaks it down per capita and total percentage of personal income. So if I look going back to 2007, you know, it's been consistently, you know, 0.5, 0.6, 0.8, and here we find ourselves at 2.58, substantially higher than it has been going back to 07. And per capita, I think the highest we had was 273 in 2012, and we're at 843 per capita. Percentage of actual taxable value of property, 0.88, substantially high, 4 times higher than the average going back to 07. What, is that specifically the community center?
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
29 million plus change or addition, if you want to say, for that general obligation debt, correct.
Actually, if you go back 2 slides here, on the debt slide, the debt service here.
Yep.
So the community center's already built in here, but just a little bit. And here in 2025, a majority of our debt will be paid off except for the community center.
Yep.
On the next, the bar graph, that one. And that baseline of just a little over 2 million, a majority of that is community center. Any other questions of Steve?
I'm impressed you got through 145 pages of that big book.
Counselor Lehman?
I'd like to just thank staff for the job that they do. It looks really good. It's, nice job.
Darren?
Mr. Mayor, council members, I too would like to thank not only all the departments, but individually my staff members as well. Melissa Schlingman, Karen Macklin, and Kim Weckman do a superb job of putting this document together. This book grows in number of pages every year. I'd say it grows between 5 and 10 pages every year, and it doesn't get any less complicated. So kudos to them, and kudos to the rest of the staff too that help with making us legally compliant in all the different areas and such too. So thank you to them, and thank you to Steve and his staff as well too at Bergen KDV. They perform a quality audit, and they do a really good job.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. So.
Counselor Whiting?
No, again, I would like to thank staff for their hard work and great results. Appreciate that, and with that, I'll make a motion to approve the 2016 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, CAFR, as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to accept these reports, the yearly audit. Discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for your presentation.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Council Mokel.
I'd like to make a motion for a 7-minute recess.
Okay, I have a motion.
Second.
Oh, and a second. No discussion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, motion carries. We'll take a 8-minute breaker. So.
Something to think about.
Reconvene the City of Shakopee City Council meeting for July 5th, 2017. Back to order. We are on C71, text amendment to allow residential use in the major recreational zone. And Mr. Kurski will present. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Hang on 1 second here. Mayor and Council, this was approved by the Planning Commission. This is a change for the major recreation zone. These are the 3 zones in the city. They're the Landing, Valley Fair, and Canterbury, so those would be the zones that would apply to. And basically, these are the changes to the current major rec ordinance. So residential uses where it's incidental use of the property no more than 20% of the total land area. And it must be part of a planned unit development. The density would be no more than 40 dwelling units per acre. The residential setback can be from 0 to 30 feet. 0 setback is allowed in areas where there's an urban character that includes pedestrian connections and wider than required sidewalks. With boulevard trees, the minimum side yard would be 20 feet. Minimum rear setback would be 20 feet, and the rear setback from residential zones, residential to residential use would be 20 feet. So those are the changes you have before you this evening.
Questions of staff? Councilor Lehman?
All right, first, I'm gonna go back to the text amendment that created R4 when, on a simple majority vote, where that text amendment is a zoning regulation not in compliance with the adopted comprehensive plan. Then we have the Veerling Apartments, which was changed from R2 to R4, again without a comprehensive plan amendment, and we don't have R4 in our comprehensive plan. So now we're looking at changing a use on a property, again without a comprehensive plan amendment and without a rezoning, and we don't have R4 in our comprehensive plan anywhere currently. So this will be the third thing we've done that is inconsistent with our adopted comprehensive plan. And that's inconsistent with both the League of Minnesota Cities, the Minnesota Planning Act, and state statute. So I have a concern that, you know, earlier tonight there's a comment made, a nexus to be fair for all. Well, we adopted a re-guiding and a rezoning of a property, the Stagecoach Apartments, through the proper process. And we haven't used that proper process since. So I'm a little bit concerned about opening up the city to, you know, a challenge that proper procedures and processes aren't being followed according to state statute.
Okay. Michael?
Mayor and council, so major rec is the zone. This doesn't need to be R4. So for instance, the power plant, which is in the major rec zone, was accomplished through a text amendment. So you can amend a zoning category through a text amendment to allow other uses. The comprehensive plan did not change. So the comprehensive plan comprehensive plan for this is major rec. The zoning category is major rec. Within major rec, there are no other zoning categories.
Councilor Lyman?
You can't create a zoning that doesn't exist on the comprehensive plan.
Mayor and council, there is a high-density zoning in the comprehensive plan.
I don't believe so.
I would suggest that that would be wrong. I mean, there are properties in the city. In fact, next to Canterbury, there is
I should say R4.
All right.
There's
R4
nothing-
is a zoning category.
Yep.
Comprehensive plan, you all define within the comprehensive plan what that high-density zoning category means.
Mr. Thompson?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, maybe I can help. In the comp plan, the land use plan, the comp plan has a broad classification, and I haven't looked at it specifically in preparation for
It
this
says
meeting.
R3.
But it would say high
High
density.
density.
Okay, and within high density, there could be multiple zoning districts that are consistent with high density.
Right.
You still have discretion as to what zoning you want, but, and similarly here, I suspect that the comprehensive plan for these three properties, that the zoning major recreation is consistent with the comp plan designation. I haven't looked at it, but that'd be my educated guess. And now the question for you is, okay, within the major recreational, excuse me, zoning district, how do you specifically want to regulate? And that's a policy decision for the council to decide, but adding residential uses as an incidental use of property by itself does not mean that the zoning ordinance is inconsistent with the comp.
But as a part of a PUD, right? And a PUD to me actually is a list of conditions. And usually in areas where we have PUDs, there's usually a longer list of conditions that you may not get in a different situation. And so I've always held that a PUD strengthens, at least from a city standpoint, what they could get or want.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council, that's generally correct. The PUD is negotiable and it's give and take. But to get at Councilmember Lehman's question, if property was zoned high density, okay, residential, right, you couldn't approve a PUD for a commercial development because because the commercial use would not be consistent with your comprehensive plan. So you would need to amend the comp plan. So the PUD by itself doesn't answer the question of whether your zoning is consistent with your comp plan. The PUD is the mechanism, the tool that you use to implement a use that is consistent with your comprehensive plan.
Okay, Counselor Lehman?
Their existing PUD is not on residential, it's on major recreation.
Mayor and Council, so what we're doing tonight, in this major rec zone in PUD, it allows a laundry list of uses, everything from storing RVs to a racetrack to commercial ventures, and including power plants. So that was a change council made through a text amendment to allow power plants in major rec. So again, what we're saying is we're making a text amendment to allow residential at these densities in this setback in major rec. So, just so we don't, this happens to be an unusual situation where the comprehensive plan category and the zoning category are identical. But throughout the city, in downtown, for instance, you could have high-density residential because allowed in the B3 district is high-density residential as part of a mixed-use project.
All right. Counselor Lehman?
Question for the attorney. What's the point of having a comprehensive plan that shows commercial here and residential here when you can change them with a text amendment?
Well, Mr. Mayor, members of council, again, you couldn't change by a text amendment to allow a commercial use in residentially guided property. Okay, that you couldn't do. Okay, here though, your guiding is consistent with your MR classification, and as Ms. Kursky pointed out, there are a whole laundry list, micro distilleries, farm wineries. They're already allowed as by PUD in the recreational, major recreation district. The question before you now is, do you want to allow residential uses as another conditional use or PUD use in the MR zone if the residential use is no more than 20% of the total land area? That's the question that's before the council. But that's not, that change doesn't mean that your zoning classification is now inconsistent with your comprehensive plan designation.
Right. Let's ask that. Let's go back a little bit to a year ago, February, March. We sat in a couple workshops where we discussed areas of location that could have higher density.
Yes.
The West End, this parcel, the Sands project on the East End. Downtown was carved out a little separately, but we were identifying areas, I felt we built consensus on that. And now,
I remember that meeting.
okay, and would you agree with that assessment?
I would play that tape because during that meeting, we were told that these individual areas would be coming back multiple times for comprehensive plan re-guidings and updatings and rezonings. That's what we were told.
We have some PUDs in question that I believe the Hy-Vee property, the PUD, we had a straight out in a commercial that was already zoned commercial that wanted a change to residential, high-density residential, that didn't have a PUD. And now this site, which the PUD, and to adding a use to it. I think there's a couple ways to get to where we want to be here. This is one way. I value the PUD from the city standpoint because I think that it gives you a ability, negotiable. I heard the word negotiable. I do believe it is negotiable, but you can set some requirements that otherwise may not be available in another way of doing things. Councilor Whiting?
You know, I don't see this project as a surprise. We've talked about it at several meetings. We've seen plans that always included some sort of portion of residential component to it. So with that, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 966 to allow residential in a major recreation zone as part of a PUD.
Counselor Mokel?
And I'll second that with a comment, because I think that the other piece that I see that this doing is it's giving ownership to the Canterbury and the Valley Fair and the Landing, because those are the properties that are most requiring workers. And for them to want to take their own land and make that usable for them, I think that's a win-win.
Okay. Counselor Lehman?
So why was the project on Stagecoach required to go through the comprehensive plan updating process and a rezoning process?
Mr. Mayor, I'd have to go back and check the history along with Mr.
Wasn't it
Kuriski. Unless Mr.
commercial?
Kuriski knows.
It's
Commercial.
major recreation going to residential.
That isn't what it is.
It's not a use, it's a zoning within a zoning.
Mayor and council, I wasn't here for that, but I understand that area was commercial, and through some changes, it was decided to make that site strictly residential. So that apartment site had to be rezoned to apartments.
So when would a re-guiding or rezoning be appropriate in the city of Shakopee?
So mayor and council, you just had one, the Hy-Vee site. So that site was re-guided to high-density residential that was originally zoned R3. To get the density they needed, it was rezoned to R4. But it was re-guided earlier on to high-density residential.
And it was rezoned on a 3-2 vote.
Correct, which is what is required for rezoning.
And it was re-guided to,
It was re-guided to high-density residential 5-0.
so you're putting high density, instead of having R1, R2, R3, and R4, you're just having high density and that covers everything.
Mayor and council, the current comprehensive plan that we have has high-density residential. It's not a zoning classification, it's a land use classification.
Right.
We're gonna be redoing the comprehensive plan, and as part of that discussion, we can look if you wanna narrow or broaden the definitions in there and the current land uses that
And
we
I
have.
would contend that when that comprehensive plan was adopted, our current adopted comprehensive plan, the highest allowable use on a property in high density was 14 units per acre. There's never been an update saying different.
We have zones, and then we have classifications.
Mayor and council, we have land use classifications and we have zoning.
Backwards.
So land use classifications come first, your zoning is supposed to match that land use classification.
More questions of staff? And we have a motion and a second on the table. Further discussion? 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 All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. Thank you.
This will probably end up causing the city a lawsuit.
Okay. Next up, 7-2, orderly annexation agreement with Jackson Township.
Mayor and council, this is the area that we're discussing tonight. This is a map that was prepared for by the Jackson Township in cooperation with the city. Their attorney, Tim Keene, has been here. He's worked on this project with our council and the mayor and Councilman Lehman for well over a year. And so basically this is the pathway for orderly annexation. You'll notice in the agreement areas E and F will not be annexed unless they ask in my lifetime. But A, so D.R. Horton is right here. The most logical spot to annex next would be A, which is this area here, and then B, down here C, and then D. The agreement allows for some changes. The major change is that the prior agreement required a 50% contiguous requirement, and we calculated actually you could never get B to be annexed in. You would have issues with C because you could not get 50%, and D you would have an even bigger issue. You can see how long that line is. So through a long period of discussion, negotiation, it was arrived at a 25% number would be used instead. The trade-off to the township is currently we pay 2 years of taxable value against their tax rate. It would now be 7 years. And to give you an idea, so the last major annexation, this is what the township taxes were per year. The city under the current OAA paid this amount plus some interest. Under the new agreement, we would pay $11,238.50, which is the current township tax rate times 7. Based on the average city tax payment, the payback would be about 0.9 years for the city to recover its payment to the township. So this is a good example. This is the D.R. Horton property and some surrounding property to that it took us a little less than a year to pay that back at the 7-year item. There's one error we made when that was handed out. On the attachment to your agreement shows the fair market value. The county sent us that table. You should have the taxable market value, which Darren will hand out to you. It's actually a little lower because there are homestead credits and some tax exempt property in there. So that will lessen the payment that could be required by the city. And the township was aware we made that mistake.
Okay. Nothing in the body of the agreement itself is changing, is that correct?
I don't believe so. Basically, the major changes were the 25%. And also, we can annex in other areas after, I believe, correct me, Mr. City Attorney, 25% of A and B have annexed in. We can go on to the other areas. Because if there were some holdouts or areas that didn't want to be annexed, it would allow us to annex, for instance, part of C. This is really going to be largely driven by the market. And as we know, we've been not that we can't predict that well where the market will want to go. But this allows, from a utility standpoint, we did work with Shakopee Public Utilities and Mr. Loney in Public Works on how we would service this area over time with the necessary infrastructure to bring this into the city.
Okay. Are there questions of staff? Questions of staff? If
I would
not,
like to thank the mayor and Councilmember Lehman. This was a very long process with lots of frustration, negotiations, but I think in the end, we were able to get both parties to come to an agreement and move this forward.
Councilor Luce?
Yeah, I had a ton of questions for staff, but I'm not allowed to talk to staff, and Mr. Reynolds won't meet with me to answer questions, so I
You
have
have
to
some
rely
questions
on
now?
on Councilor Lehman to explain it to me, so,
Ask them now.
oh, I got them answered.
Councilor Lehman?
There may be a good opportunity for us just to go over the highlights of what we're working on with the township, and I kind of did that in our last meeting at the liaison report. I guess the details are in front of everybody, but really what it comes down to is under the original agreement, we had a 2-year payback, but the annexation agreement was written in a way that we could annex, we'd eventually annex the whole thing. Well, there's a desire for the township to remain a township and keep portions, which means they're gonna have to have some operating revenue, long-term. And that's fair. It's a fair argument from their perspective. I think we went into this with the perception that we need to work out something that works for both sides. I certainly don't like 7 years. I like 2 years much better. But I understand their position and how they came to that, and why they have that concern. But on the same token, we brought forward some issues like the 50% issue that really wouldn't allow us to move, or the market to move into the next area. And if we wanted to extend, a county road was extended or something, it's really hard to extend services into an area that you don't have control over. So, there's a lot of different give and take, and 2001, I made it very clear when I was running for office then that I would not use strong arm tactics against the township to cause a annexation, to force the issue, and I still stand by that statement today, that it has to be a two-sided agreement, and that's basically what we have in front of us today. So.
All right. For me, I think a long process in the last year, working, a lot of discussion on all the issues. One thing different from years ago was more of a guiding document, a straight line document of who and how, or actually who and the process for each, whether it's a property owner, the township, or the city. The advancement in 15 years is actually the phasing plan, which actually is a great benefit to the township and to Shakopee, because it phases it. It gives people a area, a little idea of when and how, if it's gonna move. It isn't gonna be leapfrog. It also, we heard concerns from the township that down around E and F on this map, you know, they would rather have that be way last if ever. We have some language in here that helps them accommodate and feel secure in that way for a long time. This could become our next area of growth. We've already seen the West End with the Horton. Perhaps we will see more. Great opportunity. We were talking about more in commercial industrial down the line. But I think this is fair. Old agreement, 2 years. 7 was a step. I think, you know, the other numbers were bigger. But I think one of the last pieces that came is a little certainty for every party. The taxable value with an multiple factor that take that into account, so you kind of know from the township aspect, from the city. There are some risks in a down economy for the city to have that inflator aspect in there. But I certainly want to thank my colleague, Matt Lehman, has worked hard on this. We did work all over the issues. Want to thank you know, we haven't voted yet, but the township board, their attorney is in the audience tonight. Thank you for the effort. The subcommittee members and the board chair of the Jackson Township. There were a couple times I think both parties wanted to go, and that, you know, that's okay. I thought the dialogue continued, no one quit. I think this, regardless of what happens in the future, if this document were to pass both parties, will be a great guiding document for the next 20-plus years. Maybe then there'll be some tweaks again.
And
Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, you made a lot of good points, and I'd point out that both sides absolutely agree that through this process and this agreement, there's gonna be hiccups that do show up. And both sides understand that, or we're willing to, both sides are willing to come back and try to deal with any hiccups that play out. And I think that's because that we did work, both sides worked really hard at trying to make sure that both sides' concerns were addressed in the agreement. And I think that relationship is important. And there's a lot of wording in here that allows for, you know, changes if both sides agree when these things come up and stuff like this. So I think it's a good, good document.
Other discussion, comment? Councilor Whiting?
I just want to thank you guys for working with the township and the township for getting involved and working this out. It's been a sticky subject for some folks, and necessary for us. I think for everybody's gain is to put this in a phased approach and come to consensus on it. So just thank you, members, and everybody that participated in this.
Councilor Lehman?
I'll make a motion to approve the orderly annexation agreement with Jackson Township with the new
Valuations.
valuation.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. A discussion, Councilor Lehman?
Mayor, you kind of hit on one of the really important aspects of this, is that we all know that there's property owners in the township that are wondering when they may be seeing development. And we talk about our sewers and our infrastructure and how it would lay out and where would we go with it and stuff. And one of the things we really tried to do is to lay it out in an A, B, to where even the market now knows, the free markets come in and they know that they're not moving to C first, A is first, because it's, you know, kindergartner would know A, B, C, and D. And from our perspective and the township's perspective, that tells everybody, not only the free market, but the city and the township, the expectation. So, and, you know, Spuck and other power suppliers and gas companies and stuff know, and now they can plan accordingly. So I think it helps everybody all the way around.
One thing I read in the discussion was that if a property owner wants to be annexed by the city, they can still pursue that. Now, does that mean that even if it's in C and they want to pursue that, or does that become a challenge?
If they were down at the bottom of C, you know, they could petition, but they're not adjacent, and that, you know, that would create its own problem.
Right.
We want to look at, you know, efficient, effective delivery of services, and we don't want leapfrog. That's actually why this map was developed, this phasing map, to give the people the idea of where it was. We're not going to drag a pipe,
It's
you
just
know.
not economically
No, I
feasible to do
understand,
that.
yeah. But there is an option if for some reason it would work and they would want that. The only reason they would want that is for the services, I would imagine, so.
Well, if they're gonna be annexed into the city, they're gonna be required for services.
Yeah, right.
And if they were at the bottom of the C and we're up in A, it's just not financially feasible for us to do that.
Further discussion? Motion on the table. Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Moving ahead, 7C3, set a public hearing for Canterbury Tax Increment Finance District. Mr. Kursky, welcome.
Mayor and council, this is a call for a public hearing for September 5th, 2017 at 7 p.m. To discuss Canterbury Park redevelopment project number 1 and tax increment financing district number 18. Previously, before my time, there was a redevelopment district plan for this area. Canterbury has relooked at that, and we have spoken to our outside counsel and our consultants, and they're going to propose a new modification of that district at the September hearing. This time frame is necessary because between now and then, a lot of parties have to be notified so they can show up at the public hearing.
Thank you. Questions of staff? I have two. Will the EAW be completed by then? Or are they at least the comments back?
Mayor and council, yes.
And then, for illustration purposes, are we gonna have some harder numbers, or we're having Springstead look at this?
Mayor and council, yes, Springstead has been engaged. The first piece they're looking at is the potential construction of a new Shenandoah that would connect at a new roundabout or traffic signal. WSB is looking at what the traffic demand is going to be at that intersection, whether it needs to be a signal, whether it could be a roundabout. As you know, the speeds are pretty high in that road right now. I think it's signed 50 miles an hour. Depending on how this area develops and what the larger infrastructure looks at, WSB is going to be looking at whether that's a roundabout or a signal.
Okay. Other questions of staff? Set a public hearing. Councilmember Mokel?
I'll make a motion to approve Resolution 7909, calling for a public hearing on a tax increment financing district and modifications to the redevelopment plan for Canterbury Park, setting a joint meeting between the City Council of Shakopee and the Economic Development Authority for September 5th, 2017 at 7 p.m.
I have a motion and a second by Councilor Whiting, is that correct?
Correct.
Further discussion? Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes 4-1. Councilor Luce. All right. Thank you. Moving ahead, 7C4, a request for extension of construction hours by the school district contractor, Mr. Kursky.
Mayor and council, the contractor for the school district has requested extended hours, particularly earlier in the morning, 6 a.m. They were working illegally. We did send out our building inspector who did shut them down, and they were informed they would have to apply for this. Since that time, we've gotten a lot of phone calls from people, and the inspector's gone back out and made sure that they're not doing it because he has the ability to actually shut down the construction. As I mentioned in my summary, this is a regulation, as Mr. Reynolds said earlier, either we have it or we don't, and if we're gonna have it waived in some areas, there really needs to be a big reason, like it's in the Windermere area where there's no adjacent property owners. And we also think there needs to be public notice. The only way people could find out whether this was gonna happen is if they saw it online. So similar to all of our other zoning actions, if someone's gonna request this, we think it's incumbent upon who the requestor that they notify the property owner so they can show up here or send an email or contact you, because it has an impact on the quality of their life.
Okay, questions of staff, Counselor Lehman?
Make a motion to deny the request.
Second.
Okay, couple seconds.
Speak on it.
Discussion,
Mr. Lewis.
Counselor?
My rationale for denying the request is to be consistent with the previous action on another request to have extended hours for construction in a neighborhood area. So I'm looking at consistency here.
Counselor Lewis?
Well, and the consistency applies because there's housing all around this site,
Oh, yeah.
well, except one side, which
Right.
I have received complaints on this as well, even though it's a school district issue, but yet they're building and there's a building permit and a construction zone, so, Counselor Whiting?
I regularly vote against these if there's residents involved, and I believe if we set an ordinance and a time frame, I think we should stick to it.
All right, further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving ahead, 7C5, update on city-owned property 69 and 169. Mr. Kursky, welcome back. Thank you. Good to see you.
Mayor and council, this is the property we've talked about in the past. Since we last talked about this, working with the city attorney, we were able to get title to all the property in the city's name. There was a piece that was still held in MnDOT's name that's been corrected. This is a survey, Alta survey that's been completed of the property. The next item on your agenda is going to talk about actually building out this road. Mr. Loney and I have been working on some concepts to get this road built, and he and Darren have worked out a way that we believe, getting this design done, we can use state aid money to build this portion of the road. We also think the original platted right-of-way, it was platted fairly wide because no one knew what the use is. We think it's not necessary for it to be this wide. We will shrink the right-of-way down, and we're going to propose a roundabout as a way for people to circle back into this project. So this is the overlay of that survey and the actual photograph to give you some idea of what we're talking about. So this is the old, there's two owners here. This property was just placed into escrow to be sold, the old shopping center with the Marcus Theater. This is the old Kmart, which is still owned by a separate property owner. One of the things we found through this closing, and it didn't show up on the survey, is there actually is a platted access through the city's property right here. And so we're getting that researched and confirmed, but we do have two surveys now that show that, so we believe it was done back in the 70s and probably not recorded so that the city was able to find it, but we're working on getting that cleared up. This is sort of the proposed land use that we're looking at. So here's the Kmart facility. I apologize for the blackout behind this, but that was the only way I could get this drawing on here. But this would be the facility for people with disabilities that was going to go on 101. This would be, bless you, doggy doos would be going right up on the highway. They actually like this location because it's away from everyone. And if you remember on the 101 property, there was concern from the residents around there of barking dog noise. We are looking at potential multifamily on this piece up here, two pieces of business park, retention, detention in the back here, city park. Looking through the West End study, that was one of the things that was talked about, was at least an acre city park to serve these townhouses that are over here. And this is actually where the roundabout would come out. So there would be a new road from the property here that would come down and go in the roundabout, and that would allow people going to either of these two facilities to come in, go through the roundabout, and come down here, keeping them from crossing a median. So the current plan is a two-lane section through here, 22-foot wide, to allow cars, very similar to what we have out in other sections of the city. If a car gets stalled, you could still get around it, but it'd only be one travel lane. Sidewalks on one side or trail on the other, and then landscape median of 18 feet on both sides, street trees on both sides, kind of to serve as a gateway to this neighborhood.
Questions of staff? Counselor Lewis?
I just want to get this straight. Doggy doos and the rehab that we're going to go on 101 are now planning on going up here.
Yes, sir.
Counselor Whiting?
A couple things. So I guess our understanding is that the ground penetrating radar turned up some things, or did we even get that far?
Mayor and council, we had a fairly extensive archaeological examination done with that site, and at a later date, we'll update you, but basically that site is probably not buildable.
The other part of my discussion here
We
is
did have them look at this site already, so we're good.
site's
here.
good. Okay, good. I would, be consistent with the multifamily dwellings in the back, and the thought that the business park might be better served on the highway for the visibility. In my point of view, I think that might be a little backwards, so that the multi-housing should be where the business park is and the business park on the outside. But unless there's some plan that I'm unaware of.
Again, Mayor and council, this is just, we're trying to come up with some land uses, we can bring something back to you.
Counselor Lewis?
That would make more sense too, as far as the contamination of the ground where the old truck stop was. My understanding, you can put a parking lot over it if you don't disturb it, and you don't have to mitigate it. Is that correct?
Mayor and council, as part of any sale of this property, that was a 2014 environmental study. It's required by law to be updated. We have the original firm that did that, WSB, is going to update it. There is a one hot spot down here just off the road that still has volatile organic compounds. And so our goal would be not to touch that area at all for any use, including grading, because once you disturb it, it would require remediation. We've also asked WSB to prepare a plan for in chance they find anything during this road construction, because right now there are no utilities at all to this area. They all stop up here. So we will have to bring new sewer, water, and other utilities down here to end them here, and then loop the water line into the shopping center. Through that digging, if they have anything, we are required to have a plan ready in case they encounter any volatile organic compounds that might be in the soil.
Counselor Lehman?
The road that went from the parking lot over to Veerling, that road was put in with that parking lot project of the mall,
With the mall project.
the Kmart site.
Right.
Yep, I remember that.
Yep, 1970 something.
Yeah, if anybody's driven
then-
on those roads, right?
And then what's the zoning on the property currently?
It is highway commercial.
So are we gonna have one long text amendment to allow all these different uses in there?
So it's, we've been interested in having a discussion. So our city attorney sat on a panel at SLUC a week or so ago, and we do PUDs through what's considered an overlay. Most cities have switched to do it as a rezoning, so you actually rezone to a very specific plan. So for instance, in Edina, if you do a PUD there, that becomes a zoning. So when you look on a map, it says PUD, you can look up the plan, and they have to build to that plan. We're gonna be talking about switching ours from an overlay to a hard zoning. So Edina has what's considered performance zoning, so you have to meet certain criteria to get a PUD. We'll bring something back to the planning commission and you at a later date to do that.
One more question. What's the black space? Is that just parking?
I apologize, council member. This is just when it got cut. It did not cut this as transparent.
So that's part of Kmart's parking?
Yes, that's nothing. It's just, it should be clear.
Okay.
I have a couple comments on that. I know we've had at least two developers look at the spot here on the southwest corner for multifamily. The business park catches my eye right across the apartment too, but if it was office businesses, obviously, more of a quieter thing, I don't know if that would be such a detriment to those apartments. Also, I know in the past when we discussed, even a year ago, February, when we were doing our high density of which this subject came part of. I know that the park was a big part of that discussion because of the lack of a park area here, so I do like some of these components. Counselor Lewis?
Yeah, the park area, I don't know what you're gonna do about the traffic on Taylor Street. I mean, all the children live across the street. It's kind of a, you know, it's like Huber Park. You got kids running across a major road. I mean, we're just begging for somebody to get hurt.
Taylor, a busy road, do you think?
Yeah, you have
Once
been
it
up there.
connects, it will be.
Counselor
All
Lemon?
this development up there, it's gonna really get busy.
Here, I think Counselor Whiting's right on the money. If you swap the multi-housing with the business park, you could put the park, then you could increase the size of the business park where the park currently is, and then you could move the park over between the multifamily and the existing housing, and it could serve both.
And you'd have them crossing Veerling, I don't
Right,
know.
it'd be
Yeah,
right
the-
here.
A road is gonna be in between people in a park every time we build a park, I guess.
Right, but I think the busier road is gonna be getting connected to the highway, cause
Right.
that's
Right,
gonna be a
I-
collector in the future.
So Mayor and Council, just so I can get our direction here. Business park up here, multifamily housing back here with the park maybe here?
Somewhere probably down toward the bottom where the blue stuff is there.
That's our detention, yeah.
That was,
Somewhere along down on the bottom so that the housing that's already there could actually use it also, because they've been asking for it too. And then you could, where the park currently is, you could expand that business park area.
you
the
still
front.
need retention though.
And
No, the
Council-
top
You
one,
need- you
the
need
top one
water
here, Jay.
retention.
And Mayor and Council, the other thing we're doing in this is there's a very big stand of trees that we're just gonna leave alone that's right here.
Ghost neighborhood.
So maybe we can connect that park also to that stand of trees, cause it's another big open space.
Well, this is conceptual here. If we could, I don't know, move along and then, you know, define it as we go along here. Obviously, there may be some buyers available.
Developer might change their mind again.
Possibly.
Mayor and Council, what I would say is, the facility for people with disabilities and dog use has applied for conditional use, even though this has not been platted yet, because they're under some timelines. And that's an allowed use under condition to leave this as, business right here. So if we bring this back to you, we'll probably carve this piece out and leave this for a later development.
Counselor Lewis?
You said you were aware of a couple of developers that were looking at this multifamily.
A developer, yes?
Where did you get that information? I thought we were all supposed to have the same information. I haven't been given any of it. I don't know. if Councilor
It didn't
Lehman
come
has.
through, a developer showed me a plan. He didn't make any application, he isn't, you know, it wasn't an application.
See these plans come and go. Till they're platted, you don't believe it, you know, I don't believe it till I see it in a plat.
And I've never seen this drawing until right now.
And Mayor and Council, we have had some interest in the business park, so we will work with them on what size they need and how we get the best access and bring something back to you.
All right. More questions of staff?
I'm just,
If
do you
not-
have everything you need from us on this?
Yes, sir.
We need a motion?
You have enough direction?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Moving ahead then to Veerling Drive and Improvements Contracts, 7C6. Skirski.
Mayor and Council, this is actually a contract with WSB through engineering to do the design work and submit this to the state for state aid funding. We put this on the agenda a little ahead of their schedule because their schedule we thought was too tight, and this gives them an extra 2 weeks to work on the design and get the numbers right to the state for state aid.
Questions of staff? Counselor Lehman?
My biggest concern at this point is that we make sure that there's access to the Kmart parking lot, because I do remember that was part of their original. So we're gonna have to have a talk with them and do a trade-off for one spot to another.
That they'll want access.
Well, they originally had an access right here.
Right, and there is a road there.
Councilmember Lehman, this road actually goes through. We're
Right.
leaving that alone?
Okay,
Absolutely.
so that their access is gonna stay.
Yes.
Okay.
And we propose this new access because
Okay,
for the rest of this development, we figure there may be, the developer that's purchased this is looking long-term and
Yep.
wants to redevelop that shopping
Okay.
center.
I just
We've
couldn't,
left this kind of new road that would go through to the roundabout.
I just didn't see the road right here. It didn't look like there was one.
I apologize, it was hard to kind of make all the
And then
images merge.
whatever, Mayor, if I can continue,
Yeah.
whatever WSB does with the road design, that we kind of stick to it so we don't have to go back and redo it again and redo it again and redo it again. So whatever we do for the road is
We're all
what
looking
it's
at
gonna
you.
be.
Yeah, so I have Mr. Loney?
Well, I just wanted to say, if you look at the timeline, we're gonna be under a crunch to get this road built this year. So what you're gonna see is a rapid fire design,
Okay.
and it'll come to you as soon as we can and try to get it approved and move it forward. We will need to use, we wanna use state aid funds, so we have to go through the
Yeah.
state aid process, which
It's a benefit.
does take some time.
I have a question, do you have more?
That'll remain a state aid road.
Oh, yeah, yep, that's how we get
That's
our
good
state aid
news.
money.
Counselor Luce?
Did we get bids on this, or did WSB just get given the project?
WSB has actually been involved with a lot of the preliminary work already. When we tried to get from cooperative agreement with MnDOT, and we were unsuccessful in getting that. And we were able to use them for their environmental when we purchased the property. And we had to come up with a, kind of a design to show the right-of-way, because the right-of-way that we did show was free from the state. So we had to come up with a preliminary design in order to get the land from the state. So they've done quite a bit of work already, and it seemed like time-wise it'd be best to go with them.
Counselor Lehman?
Don't I recall when they put this road in, temporary road in, when it was a detour for,
One
the-
sixty-nine.
putting a bridge over 169?
Yep.
That part of that agreement was that we would eventually make a permanent road out of it?
Oh, yeah.
We had to pay $10,000 to keep it, didn't we?
Yeah, there were some,
$12,454.
it's counting, yeah.
And
Who's counting anyway?
the whole idea on this collector street, you know, like, you want connectivity there, you always wanted it to go through and keep it.
The only thing the state required us to do when they sell land like that is that we have to have connecting trails. We have to have trails to there, which we do anyway, we have our policy. That's the only requirement.
Okay. Other questions of staff? If not? Okay. Counselor Whiting?
Move to authorize the contract with WSB for $129,828 for design work. This street.
Counselor Mokel?
A second.
Further discussion? Counselor Lehman?
No, I was gonna say, every time we do something like this, we could do 129,827, and we could like
Dollar
Put a little-
time?
a
put it-
dollar a shot,
put
and
it in
maybe
the
after
kitty.
a couple of
Yeah.
years, we got some real money.
Yeah, there we go.
Further discussion? Discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes, thank you. Moving ahead, liaison and administrator, Counselor Lehman,
What's that?
Liaison.
liaison or administrator report?
I don't believe I have one.
And with the holiday, I do not have a liaison report as well. Counselor Whiting,
Nothing to report.
Counselor Mokel,
Same as well.
we're on a streak.
I know.
Well,
I hope everybody had a nice holiday.
I'm about to break it.
Yeah.
Two things really quick, Mr. Mayor. First of all, it's amazing when you have people that stay with an organization for a long period of time. And this month we have two individuals that have spent 30 years with the city of Shakopee serving the citizens. One is Tammy Vidmar, who works here in City Hall, has actually worked in 3 city halls, or will work in 3, I guess, with the new one. Will. And she works for Mr. Kursky in his department, and then Greg Tucci with the police department, also a 30-year veteran. So I think that's pretty remarkable, and I certainly want to thank them for all their service throughout the last 30 years, and may it continue. And finally, talking about new city halls, Mr. Burkett tells me that this is our last meeting in this particular city hall.
I was incorrect about that, Mr. Reynolds. I got my dates switched up. This second.
See, I knew that was going to be the case. So we're continuing. We're about a month behind schedule, as everybody knows. I think our full and move-in date is the 26th, 27th, 28th, sometime of July. So that's what we're
This year?
of this year. Yes, of this year. And that's all I have, sir.
Mr. Reynolds, thank you very much. 8B, the city bill list for our perusal. Other business in front of this board? Otherwise, I didn't make the 9 o'clock estimated time, but clocking in here. Item number 10, Counselor Whiting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn to July 18th, 2017 at 7 PM.
Second question.
I have a second by Counselor Lehman and a question.
What date is National Night Out? Night Sorry.
That is the 2nd, I believe, and so we will have our meeting then on August 3rd, correct?
Tuesday the 2nd, meeting August 3rd.
That's correct.
Right.
No, National Night Out is Tuesday, August 1st.
Oh,
August
the
1st, I'm sorry.
The 1st and 2nd.
I've got,
We have another
Sorry.
meeting before.
that's okay.
You were nodding yes to the last couple of dates, so what are the dates?
It's
First?
the 1st is night to night, and then the 2nd is our meeting.
Okay.
We might be in the new city hall.
Motion on the table with a second. Further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned at 9:27.
We're gonna live halfway.